Welcome back to Captains of Industry, and still with me in studio is David Meads. He is Managing Director of Cisco South Africa. David, we've touched on the growth of Cisco, the business. How would you describe your personal evolution as a leader?
Well, it's been accelerated in the last 2.5 years since I've been in South Africa. So I've been managing teams of one size or another for too long now. It was probably getting on for 20 years. Up until we moved to South Africa in February 2010, all of that work had been conducted from the UK, and I'd had experience working on across global teams, but never really working sustainably outside of the UK. So my personal growth, I would say, has massively accelerated, not only by having to take on a role in a different environment with a different economy and different partners and different customers, but also the personal upheaval of that as well. Not for one moment do I regret any of that, but fantastic acceleration of growth.
I'm sure you debated extensively, the pros and cons to head up an institution in Africa in 2010, especially being a family man, as you alluded to a little earlier. Clearly the list of pros was longer. So what was the upside as you saw it, and what motivated you to relocate and make this move?
In no particular order, I think it was a challenge. For me, personal development is about how far you're prepared to put yourself outside of your traditional comfort zone. And the previous role I had in Cisco was something that I was doing quite capably, was being successful with, but it wasn't really challenging me in terms of every day something different. It was actually every day pretty much the same as the previous day. I needed something that was really going to stimulate me, and actually it's a bit of that fear factor that brings that stimulation. And by moving outside of your comfort zone, actually, of course, what happens is your comfort zone then becomes bigger. So the challenge for me personally, and I'm sure it's the same with other people who are ambitious and looking to do other things, is constantly finding something that's going to challenge you. Why Africa? There are a couple of key reasons why. One is I only speak English. I have a couple of second languages, but they're very broken, French and German.
Well, thank God we have 11 official languages to choose from.
And I could choose from them, but I chose the easy one, which was English, of course. So that meant that there's not many countries outside of the UK and the US where British is spoken as one of the main languages. So language is part of it, but also the opportunity to go somewhere where it was going to be so very different to what I've experienced personally and professionally, and where potentially, if you're successful not only in your own personal development, the opportunity to make a difference, a lasting difference, was really one of the other motivations for me.
Looking at where you sit right now, how far away is it from your childhood dream profession? What was it back then as a child that you wanted to be when you grew up?
There's only two things I can ever remember wanting to be. Well, apart from wanting to be a professional footballer, which most kids at that age wanted to be. I've finally given that up now, by the way. But at the point when I was seriously looking at having to make a decision about a career, there were two things I remember. One was being a pilot, but I was never any good at physics, and you needed to have physics as a qualification to do that. And the other was to be a lawyer. And interestingly, I did, when I left my secondary education at school in the UK, I moved into college to study business studies, and that was a precursor to potentially going down that route. And then a few things completely changed the route and the direction I was going on, and I actually fell into this industry completely by chance.
Any regrets?
Professionally, no. I also believe that you can't have regrets anyway. There's no point in harbouring any regrets. But if I look professionally, the one thing that potentially would have been a regret, but then I have thought about this quite a lot, was this is my second career with Cisco. I originally joined Cisco in 1996, and I left in 2001 and rejoined in 2006. I left of my own accord in 2001 for reasons we probably haven't got time to go into now. And once or twice I've wondered, well, had I not left, what would have happened? But then I look at what did happen through leaving and the experience that I gained in those 5 years outside of Cisco, which I think has stood me in better stead for my second career at Cisco. So no regrets.
You mentioned that you lacked in physics, so and that element you needed to become a pilot. Do you think that you've got to be academically inclined and successful to be successful in life in that regard? I mean, what's your position on that?
No.
Academics and leadership?
No, sure. You need to have a level of education to be able to understand. Certainly, when you get to a point where you're in a general management position, you need to understand how a business operates. So you need to understand the basic principles of accounting and economics and so forth. But if I look at two leaders who I've looked at and held in high esteem, John Chambers, who's the president and CEO of Cisco, and Richard Branson, both of them are dyslexic. So what does that mean in terms of having to be academically very bright to be successful? I think it's about how driven you are, your principles, your basic principles of life that you get taught, probably not inside a classroom. But yes, there then has to be a basic level of academic understanding.
Another characteristic, possibly tough skin. I mean, being at the helm often comes with a greater level of scrutiny. How do you handle criticism that may surface as a result of the position you're in?
Great question, and I welcome it, so long as it's constructive. That works in reverse as well. One of the things that as a company here in South Africa, I'm trying to really focus on with our management team is to be in a position where they're constantly giving constructive feedback. I would call it feedback rather than criticism to our staff. No individual can work in isolation in a vacuum. Everybody needs feedback to understand whether they're doing things right, whether they can be doing things better. And I'm no different, so I welcome it, so long as it's constructive and so long as it's from somebody who I believe is in a position where they can offer that sort of feedback. It's
interesting that you mentioned Richard Branson as one of your role models. I mean, often companies speak about the importance of brand positioning and getting global recognition. How important in your books is brand positioning on a personal level? So, in your case, the brand that is David Meads.
That really is a great question. I think it's one of the most fundamentally important things, and particularly for us. I'm managing a business here in South Africa, but I'm largely customer facing. Most of my role, or half of my role, is with my customers and partners as well as with my staff. It's all about brand, but you have to walk the talk, not just talk it.
Yeah.
But whether it's how you look, how you show up, is so important about your brand. But it's being consistent in your behaviour that I think really differentiates somebody who's a strong leader versus somebody who perhaps hasn't got the people behind them.
Well, one can assume that influences your approach to business, but when it comes to your approach to business, where do your priorities lie? Where do you dedicate your energy and your focus when it comes to business?
Well, if I can talk to the last 2 years or so here in South Africa, and the first 9 months or so, the vast majority of my time was focused inwardly. And not by design, because we are in a field environment within the world of Cisco, but because there were a number of fundamentals that I felt were the basic foundations of the success that we needed to build over the next 10 years that had to be addressed. Some of them were broken, some of them were just perhaps not as strong as they ought to be. So for the first 9 months, I was very focused on the internal dynamics of our business, of our organisation, the staff, the development of those staff. Once we got the foundations as strong as we reasonably could, then I almost did a 180 degree and tried to focus much more, not ignoring the internal dynamics, but much more evenly balanced, focused with our work in the private sector and in the public sector. So that's both with customers, senior IT and CXO staff in our customers, trying to work to develop relationships at DG and ministerial level within government, and obviously working with our partners in how we can both evolve our businesses together.
To what extent does that focus shift when you bring in your home or your personal life? Because, that's the age-old question, isn't it? How do you balance work and home life?
And it's never easy, not least of all when we dragged your family 6,000 miles away from home. And I've got the constant of a job that's keeping me very busy and a company that I know and love. Whereas my wife, for example, has moved 6,000 miles and has no friends or family around her, and I'm not there much either. So it's a very, very difficult balance, and I have the utmost respect for my wife, but also any expat spouse who will follow and support their husband or their wife for their careers. There's no magic answer to it. I think you have to, it's back to the fundamental principles of life. Whether it's in business leadership or whether it's at home, you've got to try and balance your time and respect those people around you.
How do you know when to stay the course and when to jump ship? I mean, that hanging on is futile. Being a leader is all about knowing when to cut your losses as well.
Again, there's no magic answer to that, Alicia, as you know, but I think over the years, and more recently, if I look back over the last 5 or 6 years probably, it's following your gut instinct. You know, I've tried to build a strong team around me who you know, I will always take counsel from. I've also tried to make sure that that team is strong in the areas where I know I'm not so strong. Mm-hmm. So, of course, you can't follow something blindly until it fails. And I try not to do that. So taking counsel from those around you who you trust, but ultimately it's that gut instinct. It's almost having the confidence to follow an instinct. And you know, if you look at, we mentioned Chambers and Branson as two great leaders, one in the corporate world and one entrepreneurial. Yeah. You know, they both have that strength.
Well, when it comes to your loves outside of Cisco and the business world, I mean, I've come across the fact that you love fine cuisine. Is that cooking or dining?
Dining, I'm afraid.
Okay, yeah. So
it's
dining.
It's finding the time to do the cooking is my excuse, but no, I love eating great food. Yeah.
Let's take a look at who you'd love to take to lunch that you haven't been able to yet, and why.
Well, if I keep it in the context of where we are here in South Africa, Nelson Mandela, mm-hmm. of course. Now, you know, with the greatest respect to him, perhaps taking him to lunch 10, 20 years ago, as opposed to now. He's obviously not well now, but I would have loved to have been able to do that. I think from a business point of view, Branson, yeah. I think there's a lot that you could learn from him. I've had the fortune to be able to sit in audiences where he's been keynote speaking. Bill Clinton is another. Similarly, I've had the good fortune of sitting in audiences where he's been keynote speaking. I think from the world of entertainment, just to add a little bit of spice to it, Mick Jagger, I think would be an interesting one, because he's obviously got a history of being a real rocker in the 60s, but I think there's quite a lot of intellect in there. I think he'd make for a good conversation piece. And in the sporting world, I'd like to give you a name of a famous English sportsman, but at the moment we don't have too many of those. So if I look at a sporting world, I can't think of an individual, but probably someone from the world of golf or tennis, not least of all because it's about you as an individual rather than being part of a team. So
a full table there, outside catering of course. Let's take a look at what's next on your agenda. Is there a plan in motion for when you're back in the UK? Yes,
there are a couple of opportunities that I'm talking to my seniors about. We're going to be moving back to the UK, so we're returning home. That was part of the agreement in dragging the family down here, was that we would go back after the 2.5-year assignment. So we're going back to the UK, and I'll be staying with Cisco, exploring 1 or 2 opportunities, but I'm hoping to still be very much involved in the emerging markets business, because having moved outside of the UK and really spread my horizons, not just within South Africa, but seeing the other parts of the world that are emerging, I'd really like to stay involved in that and stay learning from it and hopefully stay contributing to it. Well,
David, a pleasure chatting to you this evening, and best of luck to you on the road ahead. Of course, David Meads is Managing Director of Cisco South Africa, and that's where we leave it for this edition of Captains of Industry. From me, Alicia Seckham, it's goodbye.